Hello, hello. It is my privilege today to welcome Michael Magán, an old colleague and friend, and currently the CEO and co-founder of Tambo, which is a company that's building a toolkit for generative agents that speak your UI, which I loved. I love the synopsis there. And so, Michael, just to dive right in, what does speak your AI mean? Speak your UI,
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah, speak your UI. Yeah.
Yes.
So what we found was a big challenge with a lot of the agents that people were building were that most people really don't want to interact with just text. And we realized that the apps have already built all these great interfaces for getting user inputs, showing data and information to the user. And basically these software engineers could reuse that technology and those skill sets to build agents that can talk to the user using a visual interface, not just a text chatbot. And then the other benefit is there's a lot of interaction patterns that are hard to learn and or discover, but they're very easy to describe. Like, hey, I need to turn in this bill to get reimbursed. I can just describe like reimbursed and then attach a bill, and then the app can figure out like, oh, there is a special page that you have to upload the receipt to and add some information to and categorize it properly, and then you can get reimbursed. Why does some user have to click through the app to find that? An agent should be able to pull up that for them right away, fill in most of the information, and only ask them for information they didn't already have or confirmation. And so, yeah, that's kind of like the background. What we're trying to build is how do we help product teams get from what they have today to something more like what I just described.
Okay, I love this because I've recently had a lot of conversations with people about the end of the era of clickiness, like
Mm-hmm.
how really um, deep mastery of a specific software used to require that
Mm-hmm.
you knew what was behind all the menus, all the buttons. Like obviously now, if you're a power user of like Power BI or Microsoft Word, often it just means that you know the menus. And it would be
Yeah.
so, and the help menus have never actually been that helpful in helping us get to the screens we want to get to, even though the
Yep.
functionality we want might be really basic. So, is it fair to understand the role of this as being something that directs me to where I want to go in this, and just basically brings it and surfaces it to me?
Yeah, that's a good way to describe it. I've also like to liken it to if you were using one of those softwares for the first time, or let's say you're at like a good example is you're at a company and they have some tooling that you need to learn. Let's say it is Figma, for example. You either have to spend much time like learning on your own, or there's like a coworker that you sit next to who's a real expert, and you just kind of ask them like, "Hey, I'm trying to do this. How do I do that?" And then they'll just kind of click through the app and then get you the right menu and say, okay, you do this, and then you can like slide this, and then you're like, oh, now I know I can do that. I'm thinking that what we're going to have is software that basically can do that for you without needing that second person to like sit next to you and show you how to do things or watch the video. That'll all seem very archaic, I think, in 5 to 10 years. That I think like the next generation of kids are going to laugh at us and say, "You used to watch YouTube videos to figure out how to use software? That's so crazy. Why did you have to do that?" Like
Yeah,
they're going to think that's so weird. I think, and it's going to be a while to get there before all the software works like this. But
yeah,
I think once we get there, people will look back and think, "Oh, it was like how did you?" It'll be almost akin to when people said, "How did you get around before Google Maps?" Like,
yeah.
how did you know how to get places without Google Maps, or how did you meet with your friends without cell phones? Like it seems so archaic, but it worked. Like people figured it out, but it's the software is so much easier to use. You don't even think about those problems anymore.
Yeah. And so one of the areas that I deal with a lot in my work, working about like knowledge graphs and like traversal of like really deep domain knowledge trees, which is some of the work that
Yeah.
my I bring into, is that um, it may not be super easy to describe in a very parsimonious way all the functionality that one might want to have or might want to perform. How do you kind
Mm-hmm.
of organize the space in something either like a UI work or across a product? When you're building Tambo, what do you do to kind of help people create the right level of fidelity and hierarchy over their functionality?
Yeah, this is if I understand the question correctly, or the problem statement, I should say, what the way we're thinking about it is when you think about design, there's like two kind of key parts of design. So one is information hierarchy, or like how do you design the or how does the design help guide people to like where they should go, right? And then
Yeah.
the simplest version of that is the nav or the menu bar, right? Is
Yeah.
effectively an information hierarchy problem. Like how do you group functionalities together to get them to a place that there's a small enough amount of options that somebody could read all of them and get to the right place.
Right.
And then how do you design it to like draw their eye to get to the right information at the right granularity? And then there's like a whole another type of design, which is more at the sometimes called micro interaction, where it's like what is the experience of just like the taking the action. And I think what we're going to move more towards in this future is that the micro interaction is going to become much higher priority, and that kind of information hierarchy will go away, because if you have an app that can just surface the functionality that that person needs at that time, or like the just so speaking of like the information, you were saying like the kind of graphs, the
Yeah.
why show them the whole graph. If I can just say problem Y, and then it's like, okay, let me just narrow down to like the parts of the graph that matter to you. I don't need to spend nearly as much time as a designer thinking about how does the human basically, like, or actually, let me take a step back. One thing we're realizing is like when you get to a UI, you under the hood have some sort of intent. Like I'm going into this app to discover some sort of information or take some action. And I have to then basically translate my intent into the design. Right. And I
Totally.
think that whole paradigm is going to shift, where you're going to
Yeah.
say, I can just tell the app or give the app signals of what I'm trying to do. And
Yeah.
it will just start to kind of like morph and adapt to the problem I'm trying to solve. And
Yeah.
some of that might just be natural language. Like I am trying to do X and then it starts doing it. That's kind of where we are today.
Yeah.
But we definitely imagine a world where it's like just the buttons I'm clicking and the hover events and where my mouse is and maybe where my eyes are, whatever different signals there are, the app will start to interpret that and go, oh, they're looking at this part of the graph. They probably want these things in the menu to show up, for example,
Yeah.
or something like that. I mean, I'm kind
Yeah.
of getting a little bit ahead of what we
No, but
know
I
and
dig
more
it.
what we're kind of imagining.
I thought about this recently, as it pertains to, well, like two things. So first of all, I think it's the movie, I think it's Minority Report, but I could be wrong about the movie. It's some Tom Cruise movie where he's like, um, he's a detective and he's
Yeah.
interacting with his phone that's like got a 3D projection that it's just generating dynamic. Maybe it's like, I can't remember. In any case, um, oh, it's the
It's
expanse.
definitely Minority Report, I
Well,
think.
it's also there's also a scene in The Expanse where this is done really
Mm.
well as well in this sci-fi world where basically there's a an interaction with a sort of generated set of images like a UX. It's a
Yeah.
three-dimensional UX. And there's a combination of big gestures, there's a combination of voice interactions, and it's so wild how close we feel to stuff like that where we're and
Yeah.
not necessarily 3D projections of it all in a room, but like certainly being able to like talk to our computer is increasingly
Yeah.
becoming the natural paradigm. And that specific thing of like talking to our computer seems like it would lead as like the dominant form of interactivity because it is just so natural for us because we are kind of like naturally like that. So what do you think in this world where we might be leaving behind a lot of clickiness, leaving behind, in fact, a lot of like visual cues if we're able to just speak to things? What is the changing role for like a visual UX versus a voice UX or like a natural language UX?
Yeah. So this is where I'll take kind of the counter view,
Sure.
is that I think we humans are like an oral species, right? Up until fairly recently, the only way humans communicated with each other was orally, right? Or actually, I should say that not actually the only way, one of the only two ways, and then the other very common way is visually, right? And so I
Yeah.
think I really just don't see the visual element of communication going away. So I should take a step back. And we think about like when we don't know a lot about early humans, but they mostly communicated through like sounds and then like hand gestures and motions and like so there's some we're very used to using our both our visual and our physicality. And you kind of gave that an example of
Yeah,
the sci-fi where they're doing hand motions and talking
sure.
at the same time. So
Delete
I think
that.
for me,
Open that up,
yeah.
Yeah,
So I think that like what we're gonna see is all of the senses being part of the interface. So or the future of software interfaces. There'll be a visual component. There'll be an interactive component where I'm either using a mouse or maybe it's hand gestures in the future. I don't know. That'll be like the next layer. But I think where we are today is definitely that natural language and voice is going to be kind of a key way people interact with software.
yeah,
But I also like to say there's a lot of things that are visually much higher bandwidth than orally. So, for example, like if I was going to tell you some data, like a graph, for example,
yeah,
it would be much, much slower for me to give you all the numbers one by one than it would be for you to look at a graph and immediately kind of make some sort of intuitions about what's happening. And I think graphs are a very obvious example, but there are lots of visual UIs that accomplish the same problem in a maybe less clear and obvious way.
yeah. I think that's interesting. Well, a person I was speaking with earlier drew attention to like the UX for calling a Lyft or calling an Uber is a very well established and very well thought out thing that you really do want to
Mm-hmm.
have a map. You don't want to just be told, this, that. Like there's a lot of visual cues that we like to have about the car, about the prices that we're comparing. We want a menu. We really want a visual experience. I guess I haven't yet tried to like run into a technology that orders me an Uber just by telling it what I want. But I do know that I do have kind of menu scanning approaches with almost every purchase decision. Like never do I
Mm-hmm.
just blindly make a purchase decision, except for perhaps like a coffee where it's like, yeah, I know exactly what I want and I'll pay the standard price. But I think we do often crave, shopping carts and things like that that are kind of like references to the kind of thing that we have in the physical world.
Yeah,
One of
actually, I'll give you an example. Like, even that's a good point. Like, a menu or a shopping cart are two great examples of where audio only would just make no sense. Like, if I went into a restaurant and they said, "Oh, press this button for someone to speak the menu to you," I would be like, "What is that?" I would just be pissed off and say, "Give me the menu. I can." I don't read every single thing. I can scan it, and in about 20 seconds, I can tell you the three things I want to
yeah,
read the full menu item for and pick.
yeah.
And so there's something about that I just don't think is going to go away. Or the other example you gave, shoot, I forgot what was the other example you gave
Or
that
with
was related to
shopping
this.
carts.
Oh, the shopping cart.
Yeah,
Yeah. So I mean I do like going to the grocery store more for like the visceral experience of it, but I find the actual experience like I have no idea when I get to the end of a grocery shopping like how much money I spent, or even which item I picked. There's so many things that I don't actually know from that experience that when I order groceries online, I can, before I even click buy, like any moment along that timeline, I know exactly how much I'm spending. I know exactly like what is in my cart. I can't tell you how many times I've gotten all the way up with my cart. And even though I can visually technically look at everything and I even have my list with me, I'll get there and go, oh, I forgot this. Right.
yeah,
And
yeah.
that much less happens when I have a UI. So I think these are all examples where I don't think we're ever going to go away from that experience of like having something visual.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. I think they have so many examples where it's just using a software is better than the alternative. Even if there's a human involved and that human is talking to me and doing most of the work, I might still pick software for a variety of other reasons. And I think that we're going to find that in the AI native agent world as well.
Yeah. One of the other phenomena that I find as a developer now is there's so much more ephemeral code, like code that is there for like a 5-second purpose and then gone. I find this a lot like in the,
Mm.
in the world of technology just a few years ago, one might have had like a whole folder of scripts that were used for like single operations and kind of like make this work one time because this is like a quick
Yeah.
execution. And I think that it's interesting to think about ephemeral UI of like components being created from kind of atomic modifiable configurable things just to achieve one goal and then being gone and not necessarily ever recoverable in the same way ever again. Is that something that
Yeah.
y'all have observed, or does your system sort of support that kind of like really short lifespan of a component?
Yeah, I mean, I would say right now that is where most of the usage is, where you're taking the component and so all right, let's take a step back. So when you build almost any UI component, you end up placing you register that component on some page or some part of an app, and then usually by navigating to that page and or clicking some drop downs or some kind of config, that component then has the context it needs to render to accomplish the task that you're trying to do. And many of our use cases are really just like, hey, instead of having to make your user give you all of that signal by clicking to get to it, just basically ask them like, hey, what do you need? And then have something in the background make calls to get the context and then show it. And so I generally try and call that, I should probably update our docs as like ephemeral UIs, where it's like, hey,
Yeah.
this UI is showing up to help you perform a task. And then once you've performed your task, there's really no need to kind of keep it around anymore, because your task is done. And we already kind of have that in many UIs. Like there's tons of forms and little components that you show up, you perform your task, and then you never go back to it again until you have to do a similar task again, which is very similar to your example of having like I have little scripts to do different things. But
Yeah.
I think what's really cool is you can make those components much more configurable, much more flexible. One use case I've seen that's really cool is there's a lot of like enterprise apps where you have to have as you kind of move along the enterprise spectrum, you start having more and more configurability that they need. So something that's really simple for 70% of your customers gets more and more complex because the tail customer or the 1% of the 1% needs a FACTA check or some kind of weird government thing you don't know about. And so that UI gets super complex because every user has to be able to discover it. But if I could just go into the app and say, once it knows a little bit about me and goes, oh, you're a startup, you don't have any of these requirements, we'll keep it simple for you. So like when this UI shows up, I'm going to show it to you with less stuff on it. But oh, I know something about this customer. I know that they're in a big enterprise. Maybe I start showing some more advanced features that they might need, and or they might get to that page and go, hey, I need to do my FACTA check or whatever it is. I don't even know if FACTA is a real thing. I made that up as I went, but I need to have FACTA checking. You could just type that in, like I need FACTA checking, and then the UI goes, oh great, let me update. I have FACTA checking. Now you have that. I'll remember that for you in the future, so that next time you come to this kind of you ask to do this type of task or you come to this page, I can remember your particular config. So I do think we'll see lots more UI that's ephemeral, but also just kind of personalized based on that particular user and what they're trying to do. And you'll kind of learn. I think a new thing people will be doing in apps is saying, "Hey, can you do X?" or "Hey, can you also do Y?" as you're doing some task, and it's just like the UI starts updating, going, "Yes, yes, I can do those things. I just didn't show it to you because 90% of people don't need that, but you're like one of the small subset of our users who do need that feature. So I'll show it to you now, and I'll remember that in the future."
Yeah. Oh, it's interesting to think about how how adapted we are. I recently a word that's just been coming up over and over for me is skeuomorphic. The idea that things are intentionally designed to resemble previous technology. Like
Mm-hmm.
the classic example is like railroads that are only as wide as Roman roads were because of the history of like how these systems evolved, how wide cars were, and all these sorts of stuff. And it's like these
Yeah.
things, these cues become inherited in the way that we build the world in a lot of ways.
Mm.
Uh, and so, for instance, our defaulting to hierarchy, I imagine there's something about the way we think, which is intrinsically like hierarchical and sort of levels of categories and tighter levels of
Mm-hmm.
categories and things like that. But it's amazing how much of the of that might just be informed by like data structures too. Like what are the core data
Mm.
structures, and what about that is actually natural, intrinsic, versus sort of imposed by the rules of math and binary search or something like that. So it's interesting to think
Mm.
about how UX changes as a result, if it is able to kind of like maybe meet humans a little bit more where they are, as opposed to sort of forcing them to conform to like the hierarchical representation that we decide as like designers and user and designers and engineers.
Yeah,
The
yeah. What it's making me think of is that, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say what it's making me think of is the common phrase people say of the UI. You shipped the product org, or you shipped the org structure of the company. It's like a lot of times you go into an
Totally.
app and people ask, hey, why is this here and not here? And it's just because that's the team that owned that thing, and so or they're part of this org, and so it's much easier to put that there, even though it may make no sense, or maybe only makes sense to some people that it should be there. Um, so yeah, I do think there's a lot. I mean, obviously, good companies are try and make that not the case, and they do all this kind of nav redesigns and try and reorganize things and make the app easy for teams to put their functionality where it makes more sense for the users. But yeah, I totally agree with you. I like to say that we actually, when we did our branding for Tambo, we intentionally picked a more kind of friendly aesthetic because I think a lot of AI companies went for the very kind of neo brutalist. This is the future of the everything's kind of like neo cyberpunk vibe, and we
Yeah.
want to be a little bit different. But the other reason we chose it is that I think that what we're doing makes software feel more human, not just because you can talk to it, but because when you work with somebody, right, the way that they interact with you is always very personalized. Like if I go to my lawyer, for example, there's some big inefficiencies in that experience as well. But one of the things that's unique about it is I just go to them with a problem. I don't read off a menu. I don't go look at what can this law firm do. I just say, I have this problem. Help me solve this, right? I need to sign this contract. I don't know. It scares me. I don't know what's going on here. Can you tell me what I need to know, right? And I think that we're going to have software that feels like that, where I don't go into the app and have to like learn it or watch YouTube videos. I mentioned this earlier. I just tell it like, hey, here's what I'm trying to do. Here's what I'm worried about. Here's my problems. And it's going to start going, oh, I can customize this experience to you. I won't show you 8% of the app. I'll just show you the stuff you need. I'll walk you through it. Anytime you run into a question, you don't have to read a doc or talk to support. I can just start answering it for you. Oh, the reason you have to organize your data this way is so that I can show you data like this and data like that. And then you suddenly now understand the value of the product better. There's just so much stuff that I think we're going to start seeing in software that you just couldn't do at scale, but you now can do at scale.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that was kind of like going back to the skeuomorphic. Like I think that software is often limited by the technologies that we have. Before mobile, everything had to be desktop, and so that limited the things you could do. You couldn't have Uber. Having the phone creates a whole new types of interactions that could exist. And I think we're going to see the same thing with AI, where it's like how you interface with software is going to just shift fundamentally.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about like Tambo going from, I guess, like a project you were working on into being, now fully fledged, on the road, a company. I know that journey of very well, from the kind of lost in the wilderness, or the search for purpose and meaning and direction, to kind of like coming out with a thesis. What was the process like?
Yeah, it's been a big journey, both from on the business side or the product side and building something, and also a personal journey, as you kind of noted. I I actually had maybe the inklings of what Tambo would become almost 6 years ago. So when I worked at Indeed, I worked, I think, on one of the first generative AI products there. We built like an AI job description builder. It didn't get shipped at that time. It got shipped later, but we kind of did the first prototype and POC and learned what you could do and what you couldn't do. And there's war stories of using LLMs back in the early-ish days. I mean, I know there existed before that, but in the early days of product people actually starting to build stuff with it. And I remember having a very strong feeling that this was going to have it be a much larger shift in technology if the LLMs could get better, and then they did get a lot better. And so that part I wasn't as confident, but the part that like, hey, if this technology keeps getting better in the way that it could, it will fundamentally change how software is built. And fast forward a couple of years, I was working on another product where we were starting to use LLMs before ChatGPT came out to do some data translation work for our end customers. And honestly, in some ways, it's very similar to what we're pitching today. They come in with their own data. They just upload the data. The LLM tries to do the mapping and then ask them questions. It's funny now because that seems so obvious, but back then that was, could you even do this, and would it even work, and could it write the right code to do the translation? Because sometimes it's a bit more complicated than just like a one-to-one mapping.
Totally.
But I remember having that experience thinking, oh, if it works here, it could work for all kinds of software, and it's going to have this massive impact. And I remember being kind of the weird AI guy at my last company where I was really excited about it. And then ChatGPT came out and I was a really early adopter, and other people started using it. And they started coming to me and saying, remember that crazy thing you were telling me about how AI is going to change things a lot? I just tried ChatGPT and it's kind of what you were describing. And I was like, yeah, I'm a huge user. I love ChatGPT. And I was like one of the early people I was having it help me write docs. And I'm not the best at grammar. And so it was really useful for me to help kind of clarify my thoughts. And I would get all of these compliments about, oh, you're such a clear writer. And I remember thinking, some of that's me, but a big part of that is that ChatGPT is really good at writing and taking my kind of convoluted thought and making it simpler and more narrow. But yeah, so I basically had this idea for a while. And then fast forward like another year and a half-ish, I was just really surprised that there wasn't anybody really trying to solve this problem. And I was building another app that had a generative UI component in it. And I just kept writing all this glue code and trying to get it to work just the way I wanted. And realized, oh, I'm probably not the only person that has this problem today, but I know in the next decade, orders of magnitude more people are going to have this problem. And basically that was kind of how Tambo got started. I met my co-founder at a hackathon. He also had a similar thesis about the future. And we just kind of locked in on that and said, hey, we're going to bet the next 10 years of our life on the idea that AI is going to fundamentally shift how people use software, and somebody needs to build the tools to help product teams build those experiences, and it might as well be us, so we're going to do it.
I love it. Yeah, I think that there's these, as you shared, there's these core moments when you see a demo or you see an experience, and maybe it's just like the 10% possible of the experience, but in that experience, you see what the potential is of this. If like this technology shift, if the boundaries shift, there was I think it was Adept AI, which was a very early company that was doing browser interaction to basically accomplish full end-to-end tasks in the browser. And I don't know how Adept may have fallen to the wayside as sort of Anthropic's co-work and other tools have kind of come to the fore, but their ability to capture the potential back in like 2023 of what it would look like to really use natural language to interact with the computer was like, to me, just like mind-blowing. It's like, wow, yes, this is a new era for human and computer interaction. I wonder uh, whether a skill like typing on a keyboard will become less relevant for the next generation. Like a thumb board will still make a lot of sense because we'll be interacting with that, but it might become a relatively specialized skill to actually type on a keyboard, because increasingly we might be able to use just voice and fingers to do the vast majority of what we want.
Yeah, I do wonder if I think that I have two thoughts on that. So one, maybe because I grew up in the generation of keyboards, I often have more clarity of thought when I type something out. not, and actually I don't have the same clarity of thought when I write by hand because I just hate writing by hand. And so it's maybe more clear just because I want to write less because I don't like doing it. But on a keyboard, I'm much clearer. I can be much more precise in what I'm saying. And when I'm speaking, I often find that I'm much less precise. And one thing that's cool about LLMs is they can usually take my less precise language and filter it down to the more precise thing. And I find that sometimes even when I'm talking to it, I'll say, hey, do this. Actually, no, don't do that. Do this instead. And then the LLM
Yeah.
is smart enough to go, ignore previous sentence, ignore
Yeah.
previous instruction, listen to next instruction.
Yeah.
But I do wonder if you get rid of keyboards because speech is so easy, will it change how people will people be more clear and precise in how they speak because they have to be better at it? So I don't know. This is one of those questions
Yeah.
that I have, how it's almost like the inverse of skeuomorphism, right? Like the tools that we use affect how we as humans develop.
Totally. Yeah. We are
The obvious example, yeah.
Oh, I was gonna say, maybe you're gonna share, but we all are very good Googlers, and we became very good Googlers through this process of interaction back and forth with the search engine. And now we're
Yeah.
becoming really good prompters, which is a very different skill.
Yeah. It's funny you say that. That's one of the examples I like to give because I one of the early feedback I got for Tambo, I get it less and less because I think people are coming around on this, but they were saying, oh, people just won't know what to put into these natural language inputs because they just don't know how to use them. And I always say, some of you might be young enough that you don't remember this, but I remember when search engines came out and I was young. So I obviously adopted them very quickly, as most young people do. And I remember teaching my parents how to use Google because they had the exact same problem. They asked me, how do I use this? What do I put in here? And I would literally have to tell them, well, actually, it's funny. Two things I would say. One is you tell them, well, what are you looking for? And that's like the first step. Just put it in the input. But I think we also forget the era of searching. Now you could just kind of type whatever you want into Google search, and it's pretty good at figuring it out. You can write a full sentence. You could sometimes I'll just paste text from somewhere, and Google's pretty good at figuring out that 3 to 6 words of that search is irrelevant, and the two things that matter are the name and the company that person worked at or whatever. But there was an era where you had to learn how to, you had to write your search in a particular way for it to get the right results. And I feel like we're kind of just coming out of that experience with agents, where the models necessitated, prompt engineering. I think prompt engineering is one of those things that it might evolve a bit, and there might be some place for it, but the idea that there will be millions of prompt engineers, I don't think that's the case. I think these products are going to get intuitive enough that you don't need a ton of context on how to use them. And there's right now we have a lot of power users that are pushing the models to their limits, and so it's similar to using Google to find stuff that is difficult to find. There's power users who are using Google to find stuff that was hard to find, but as this technology evolves, I think some of that is going to go away, right? And you're not going to think about that kind of stuff anymore. Like, hey, did I write the prompt correctly, or was I clear enough, or did I add the right keywords into it so that it would do a little bit better than if I didn't add the right keywords into it? I think a lot of that is a short-term optimization problem.
Yeah, I agree. I'm curious, in running Tambo and kind of like, building a product that you want to scale, you want everyone using, what is the kind of core toolkit for you on the business side, as CEO, kind of that? Also curious about on the technology side, but what are the kind of core tools that y'all have adopted, workflows that have become really common? How much are you leaning into the latest generation of AI or agentic tools, and what are you skeptical of?
We're pretty early adopters of agentic tooling. We're obviously using coding agents, Cloud Code. We've used Cursor. We've used Codex. We use a few different code review products that help us do our work. So we're obviously, I think almost every software company is that. For sure, every startup is using these tools. And then I think most tech companies are coming around to that. So that's not particularly new. We have started to use some of those tools in maybe more unconventional ways. We've used them for marketing, helping us write marketing. We have skills for helping the team stay on brand when they talk about Tambo and have kind of consistent messaging. We've also used a lot of different products agents, partially for user research, so that we can kind of know which ones are good. One of my favorites actually is Supabase. I think has one of the best embedded agents in their app that I actually love to use, and I generally use it over the rest of their UI. And it's kind of awesome because I think like when people ask me like, hey, how do you know this is going to exist? I'm like, well, I know I use Supabase primarily through their Sidekick agent. So if they can figure it out, then every other app out there can figure it out. But in terms of like our effectiveness, I tend to think less in tools and more in processes, and trying to think about like what tools create the most leverage on the team, right? Because the limited resource we have is what to build and how to build it. Not how functionally, but like what matters to building this to make it work the way that we want. And then how do we get people to care about it and use it? And those things I still haven't found any kind of new agentic tools that like really solve those core problems. Many of them solve parts of that problem, but I think there will be like a new kind of business stack that comes out, because the over focus, I think, on just how to write code is just such a small subset of the actual problem of building good products. And I'm excited for some of these other tools to kind of catch up to that level of sophistication.
Yeah. Are there any design tools? Obviously, your own tool is like in some ways a design tool. Are there design tools that you have kind of leaned into that are early that help with prototyping? Or have you kind of been in the kind of prompt-driven development world?
We did a small exploration into AI powered design tools, and we haven't found anything that we really like yet. That wasn't. I think we always got stuck between how much better is this than just having the coding agent create the UI and then looking at it, interacting with it, making updates. I guess the prompt driven UI. I am looking for something that would work better like that, especially for kind of keeping the product on brand. This is often a very common confusion about like
Totally.
what we're building. People are thinking like, oh, it's you're doing generative UI, you'll help me build the app. And it's like, no, you still need to have design. You need to think about what should these UI components look like and feel like. This is generative UI, at runtime versus at build time. But yeah, I wish I had a better answer for that. We are definitely gonna explore more in that space because we have a very design heavy product. And as soon as I have a good answer, I'll send it to you.
Yeah, please do. I've used obviously a lot of Figma's Make product. I thought was really interesting, but
Yeah.
it's almost like it's comparable to the experience of working in Cursor, working in Claude Code, and just sort of dynamic iteration. There's, I think, one product I had demoed, I don't recall the name right now, where it had the generative component, and then you could also interact with it as a kind of like Figma mock where you could drag and resize things on the page after they appeared. And I was like, oh, that's cool. That's sort of the perfect mix, because there's so often we're just trying to tweak like a font or like bring something down a little bit. And it's got that the best components of both.
I'm glad you brought that up because that was Figma was an example we said early on of where it's really awesome when you can just tell it like, hey, create create a mobile screen with 3 images on it, and it kind of can do a really good job of getting to that, and it probably will do all the spacing generally right. That stuff can all be done by default, but it's actually pretty hard to describe a UI beyond like a very generic thing. Or what I see a lot when people say AI can do design is it's typically like they're designing something that's a very well-known thing. Like it's been
Yeah.
designed many times before. And if you were to design it as a human, you wouldn't do it from scratch. You would just go look at like, hey, how does Uber Eats or how does Uber do their ordering of Ubers? It's been designed to death and tested. It's probably like the right-ish design. You would kind of copy the general thing and then maybe customize a little bit to yourself. And that's really all the agent is doing is effectively that. Where I think a lot of these tools, and the same with coding to some extent, they all break down when you're trying to build things that are new, right? Like if you're just building a CRM app, you can get Claude Code to build a decent CRM app in about 20 minutes and $1,000 of tokens or whatever, or like probably less than a few $100s of tokens. But then you want to build something like more complex, like, hey, an agent-driven CRM. Very few of these agents will build something that's actually usable because
Yeah.
all of those design paradigms don't exist and they're not in the the latent space of the models yet.
Yeah. I think that's a really interesting observation. Um, what is the secret? Tambo launched as an open source project. You had a lot of like traction in stars that kind of came on. What's the secret to building a open source product that makes a splash?
I think the trick is to be just a little early. That's like the short answer to it, right? Is you don't want to be too early because there's two problems with being too early. One, it's really hard to keep sustained momentum on something when you're early because most people don't get it, and so if you're too early, you'll probably burn out. And then the second thing is often I think when you're too early, you kind of build it incorrectly, right? Because the technology isn't typically mature enough, right? That's the reason not everyone's building it is usually the maturity level of the software to build it is not there. And so the trick, I think, which is kind of hard, is to be just a little early. So you start building, months to less, like we were about a year-ish early on building this. And that gave us just enough runway to kind of like build something that was actually usable when let's say I forget there's a great product terms for these, but not the early adopters, but there's a couple stages. I think we're
The
still
next
actually
wave. Yeah.
we're still very early in the adoption of generative UI, but something step changed about 3 to 4-ish months ago, and we felt it, and then it just started happening to us because we were building the right thing with the right kind of approach. We tested it on some early adopters of this problem, and so when people found us, they thought, "Oh, I've looked at a bunch of other products in this space. They're all doing it one way. You're doing it slightly differently or fairly differently, and that approach is closer to what I
Right.
want." And that's really the real trick, right? Is you have to have something that people want and is differentiated from what exists out there, and
Wait, so the big secret
just
is to
mature
build
enough.
the big secret is to build something people want? Gosh.
Yes. Yeah. That's like the classic YC line: build something
Yeah,
people want.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. That is the trick. But I do think one other trick that I think is worth noting for how to get adoption is that you often have to start. You just have to start small, right? It's just not just what you're building, but we were getting 1 to 2 people a week finding us and using us for many weeks, and then I remember when it kind of switched like 1 to 2 people a day, and then it was somebody actually posted about us around the holidays, and I don't know how they found us, but their post went viral, and then it was like, oh, we're getting now 10 to 20 people. Like we get a few hundred people over one day or two, and then it was like 20 to 30 people every day, and then it just kind of like kept going like that. We got picked up in newsletters, but like I say that as in like it looks like it was sudden, but from my perspective, I could kind of see how that geometric growth happened. And for a very long time, I remember thinking, is this going to happen? I don't know. We'll see. And so that's my biggest caution to people is that you just have to have a point of view of the future, be willing to bet a little bit early, not too early, and just kind of stick with it until the rest of the market catches up to you.
Yeah. I think one of the most unintuitive parts, I guess, first of all, I think people in general, we all have very bad intuition around non-linear processes, things that are
Mm-hmm.
not similar day to day. And I think this is
Yep.
especially true with starting new things. It is a very non-linear process. And the
Mm-hmm.
thing I call it thingification, going from nothing to like a thing. is such a nonlinear process of like very clear things. So like a geometric thing is just, we don't have intuition about how that's supposed to work out. It just felt like, it feels like a wild ride to go through. Um,
I, I
but
recently I recently reread the book Anti-Fragile, which I had read maybe like 10 years ago. And that a big premise of that book is that, and I think it's very similar to Black Swan and a few of his other books, is basically that humans are very bad at non-linear thinking because it just is so outside of the norm of human experience up until honestly fairly recently, right? The idea that you could buy a lottery ticket and go from being, middle income to a decamillionaire overnight is something that really only existed in modernity. That didn't really exist. Like only one out of 10 millions had that kind of like lifestyle change. But then if you live in the modern world, it's still a pretty rare occurrence, but it's a much, much more common occurrence that people can kind of have these non-linear experiences, both positive and then negative. And it was funny because I've been thinking about this for a long time, but I joke, actually, maybe my real advice to people is that you want to increase your surface area for luck, because you can't predict when luck will happen, but you can create more opportunity for happenstance to benefit you. In the same way that you can do things that can increase your surface area for bad luck, right? I'm not going to give a bunch of examples. There's probably tons of
sure.
examples of things that increase
Yeah.
your surface area for bad luck.
Having a drinking
Um,
problem or something like that.
Having a drinking problem is for sure a surface area for bad luck.
Right.
But yeah, so I think that's really honestly my biggest advice to people, like ignoring like how do you take a idea and get it big, or how do you take an open source project and have it go viral. We took a lot of swings that went nowhere, right?
Yeah.
I think I mentioned before, I went on some podcasts like really early on. I tried to create YouTube videos. I did a bunch of random things. Some worked okay, some worked better than others. We took a pretty big swing with a recent launch, but you just kind of don't know what's going to work. And so you have to just kind of take those swings, and each one of them has some potential for nonlinearity. And you want to take as many swings have nonlinear returns too, like swings that have not non-nonlinear, I guess, linear returns. You don't want to take as many of those, because those are actually low value. And so that's probably the real advice is like, how do you have more and more nonlinear opportunities, positive, ideally,
Yeah.
with capped downsides?
What have been, and I guess last question, what have been the key things that you've done that have increased your sort of surface area for luck?
That I mean, honestly, the list is incredibly long, so I'd have to just pick things that like come
Sure.
top of
Yeah.
mind.
Yeah.
But I mean, one example is how I met my co-founder. I had this idea, like an early idea for what Tambo is. Had the courage to go stand up in front of a bunch of strangers. I actually messaged people in advance. I messaged him in advance because I could see who was going, and I was like, "Ooh, you'd be a good fit for my team." So he told me, like, I was just like, "Oh yeah, you messaged me." I said, "Oh yeah, thanks." I messaged like 4 or 5. I messaged like 10 people, hoping that like 4 would want to join my team. But that's an example, right? Very low risk to me to send that message. Very low risk for me to show up. I didn't know that would turn into a startup. I actually didn't even think it would be a startup. I thought that I would get people to work on this as a side project to help me with this other product I was working on. So, you just honestly don't know how these things are going to pay off. So it's just, you want to do as many of them as possible, right? Like, hey, if I happen to meet somebody who's fun to work with, maybe I'll work with them. You just don't know how those things will pay off. Other examples are just like putting yourself out there, right? I mean, I remember when we fundraised our pre-seed, that was all new to me. It was, to be honest, a kind of scary process. You're kind of exposing yourself to these really smart, often well-connected people with your fledgling idea, and trying to convince them that this idea is good and that you're the right person to build it. And you're only about 80% sure that you're the right person to build it because, I'm a human. I don't think I'm like the best thing ever. I know all my flaws, but yeah, there's just so many ways that you have to kind of just like put yourself out there and realize that the downside is usually much smaller. It's capped. It's much smaller than you think. Like they'll say no to you. That's like pretty much the worst case scenario. That's about all that happens if you try and fundraise, right? As people say no to you, and you learn from that. I learned a ton from pitching and learning how to pitch to investors. I learned a ton from, I started making videos on Twitter and posting them, and some went super viral, and some 20 people looked at, even saw, and no one liked them. So, but the downside to me was super low. What's the worst case? Nobody sees it. What's the best
Yeah,
case? Tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people see it, and somebody tries to use our product. Totally worth it.
I love it. Michael, thank you so much for being part of Pioneer Park.
Yeah, thanks for the invite. Excited to see where this goes.
Absolutely. Me too. Excited to see where Tambo goes.
Me too.